a disciple worth reproducing is what we've been talking to you about. And it takes me back to that thought, when Jesus, a familiar passage we all know, and we keep saying, is the Matthew passage, the very last words of Jesus when he's on the mountain and he's talking to his disciples and he's got their attention and he tells them to go make disciples, baptizing in the name of the Father. And he goes on and then he says this one phrase, and it's teaching them to obey. And what I've come to realize is that I understood the knowledge part of being a disciple. But what I really want to focus now, and I realize I can be better at it, is the obedience part, at doing it, making other people into disciple makers. And so that leads us to a really good point, and that is sharing our story. So I've asked my brother to come, and would you share your story with us?
Sure. I mean, there was a time in my life when I feel like I was very arrogant and self-absorbed, immature, and that led me to pursue popularity, and that didn't seem like it led anywhere. It actually gave me this lack of peace. I felt very unsettled, and then I went to church, and as I got into church, I noticed a friend that was really I was going to say self-absorbed. That's not the term. He was very selfless, and he really poured into other people, and yet people loved him. They thought he was a very awesome guy, and he didn't try to bring the attention to himself. And the one common denominator that I noticed about him was that he had Jesus in his life. I mean, it was clear that he was living the way Jesus said in the scriptures. And I soon realized that that's exactly what I was missing. Like, I was missing having Jesus in my life. And so I began to pursue a relationship with him and accepted Jesus. And, it gave me a love. It began to grow in me a love for other people, a concern for other people, and even to find serving other people with joy. And so now I have found the peace that I was missing. And, wouldn't you like a story like that?
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. And that made me think of the three parts that people want to do and want to use when they're thinking about what their story is about. Like what we were like before Jesus, what we were like, when we finally encounter and meet him, how that, change that occurs, and then what happens after.
Yeah. So, when you think of your story, it really has three parts. It has a before you knew Jesus, and you might have known Jesus, but you weren't doing anything with him. And then there's that section in the middle that come to life moment, that moment when you died to yourself and got to be on mission with Jesus. It doesn't always have to be something that you did early on in your life. Maybe you're finding a new awareness to obey him, and that has become part of shaping who you are. And that middle section is all about that. Making Jesus the hero is the point of why your story is powerful. The last part, though, describes the idea of like what your life was after you started to live for Jesus and being on mission with him. And so you have three equal parts. They really balance each other. You really shouldn't spend so much time on your beginning, nor your middle, nor your end. It should be a balance of all three. So like if it were a 3-minute story about your life in Christ, it might be 1 minute of before you knew Jesus. Right. The second minute might be all about that middle part of what happened when you died to yourself and lived more for Jesus on point, intentionally. And then the last part is what does your life look like now? And so those are the things that make up a good story for anyone who's a Christ follower.
Well, and I noticed one thing. Yours wasn't very long. Did you do that on purpose?
Yeah, so you can read people quickly, but more importantly, people don't want to always hear your story go on and on. So I've made a point to learn how to share my story in 15 seconds, in 30 seconds, in a minute, and 3 minutes, mainly so that I can gauge when somebody really might be interested in hearing a longer version. But most of the time, I share mine in 30 seconds or less. And that way, if somebody really says, not interested, I'm not spending a lot of time dwelling in a place they might feel uncomfortable. So that's the purpose of that.
Okay, well, thank you. And now it's your turn. So tell me more about your story. How did Jesus do something incredible in your life? What's your story?